Hi, my name is Badmouse, and this is, Pond of Wood. I recently finished watching The Handmaid's Tale, and it was pretty good. Whilst plenty has already been said about its themes of gender oppression, and to my surprise, shallow focus, being the cishet white male that I am, the other common theme that it got me thinking about was that of fascism, and how it comes to be. In many ways, you can view Handmaid as the perfect summary for a fascist West. Historically, fascism isn't an ideology with much theoretical backing nor structural definitions. This is in part due to it being a hyper-idealist ideology implemented only at times when the current system is in crisis. Put in place as a last resort to maintain things the previous society may have considered to be the status quo. To outline this, what drives many of these regimes' prominence normally always happens after a so-called catastrophe. In pre-war Europe, this consisted mainly of the aftermath of World War I, and later the crash of 29. In Handmaid, the main reason for fascism's prominence is a little bit different in that it's not due to economics, but the imminent crash of humanity itself, due to low population rates. We've actually already seen this in other films whereby a country becomes a large police state, most notably Children of Men. What I liked about Handmaid was how it gives us a backstory for how this happened. Men deals with the theme of low birth rates, but that film took place 2 decades after the catastrophe, and was dealt with therefore in mystery, which was right for the film's structure. Handmaid, on the other hand, is at the beginning of the crisis, and thus we get a better insight as to how society eventually crumbled down. It makes sense considering it's a TV series, and therefore we have longer time to digest the details. Because of this catastrophe, society is posed to become unstable, and it's this instability that results in people looking for any measure to return society back to its so-called former glory. And that's where we get one of the most famous tenets of fascism: scapegoats. Fascism's goal is to bind people together as a thick contingent group to maintain order by adherence to an idealized society prior to the fall from grace. But in order to do so, it faces some contradictions. As history has shown, society continuously strives out of older, conservative relations into more newer, progressive ones. As of such, it has to drive home the ideological narrative by looking for outsiders, others, to blame for the disaster. In Nazi Germany, this was filled mostly by that of the Jews, but also communists, Slavs, and other so-called degenerates. In Handmaid, the other is filled by numerous adherents to permissive society. Promiscuous women, doctors, Catholics, homosexuals, and even college professors.
I thought all the college professors were sent to the colonies, or I have 2 good ovaries, so they were kind enough to overlook my sinful past.
You may wonder how on earth the Gilead regime managed to even come about. It is surely so barbaric and uncompromising that nobody except the few that would be beyond criticism could possibly support it. It's easier then for us to just think that this is purely fantasy. But due to the catastrophe, just like I said, it causes people to act in ways previously they would not have. Because many ordinary folks long for stability and survival. We never see the ordinary lives of the masses, instead restricted to the privileged minority of chief commanders, but it's reasonable to expect that many people in Gilead would have at least tolerated the rules put in place, not because they're desirable by any means, but because they've come to believe that this is the only option they have. The Waterford family at times don't appear like ideological fascists, but more like high-ranking individuals that were thrust into a situation beyond their control, which led them to feel like this was the only way forward for humanity's survival. Serena Joy, oddly enough, starts out as a stronger believer in the sons of Jacob than her husband Fred.
We're saving them. We're doing God's work.
But then has to succumb to the reality of which she has created. She goes along with it because, again, it's for the greater good. She wants to accomplish her goals. We see at one moment we might defend her as a helpless subject, but then 10 minutes later utterly despise her as she succumbs to her goals. You can also contrast this with the character of Nick, who didn't get into the Sons of Jacob for any ideological reasons, but simply because he was, like many, trying to survive. He was a victim of his circumstances. Well, obviously not every character in the show is sympathetic. Damn it, Lydia. And from this you can understand why many of those in actual subjugation might even look upon their oppressors benevolently, as showcased by the new Offman.
I used to get fucked behind a dumpster just so I could buy a 6 of Oxy and a Happy Meal. I'm clean now. I got a safe place to sleep every night and I have people who are nice to me. Yeah, they're nice.
Now take that back 90 years into Weimar Germany, and you get the idea. Something I've also noticed in these kind of hyper-masculine mindsets in general is that you get this sort of pseudo-patriarchal feminism forming. Look at how the regime treats women at their best. Like, yeah, sure, we'll treat you like queens, we'll give you stability and comfort, a place to live, and above all a purpose. But if you don't act like whatever we tell you to, then it's off to the gallows. It's love on their terms, artificial love, love for the regime. Of course, because this ideology is lacking in any theoretical backbone, it chooses instead to take itself upon different structures depending upon the situation, but only accepting what will justify the regime when it is needed. The actual backing for a lot of Handmaid comes from Genesis, when Jacob needed 2 handmaids to have children when his wife could not, and thereby it places this fascism upon biblical groundings. America is, after all, a very conservatively Christian country, and so it makes sense to appeal to the already embedded understandings thereof. Just like Hitler used unified Germanic nostalgia for his regime, Benito Mussolini with the Roman Empire, and Hirohito with the pre-industrialized Japanese culture of honor. It must quash resistance to accomplish this, but only so much as is necessary. Even open racists will from time to time allow leeway. Take nativist Bill the Butcher's mentoring of Irish-American Amsterdam in Gangs of New York as an example. You can thereby find a lot of contradictions and hypocrisy occurring, particularly in the case of Serena, who frequently smokes forbidden cigarettes and even once offered to disobey the rules and sleep with their driver. Because although this goes against everything she believes in, she ultimately succeeds to her circumstances for the completion of her goals. It just makes things simpler that way. Commander Waterford is no exception either, performing forbidden acts of ceremony by inviting Offred into his study. And not even he seems to be that indebted to his religious beliefs, with his recurring visits to brothels, which are allowed by the regime, interestingly enough. Not even they believe in their own doctrines. This was all probably done as in the theme of religious hypocrisy, but it works the same. A facade is fine as long as most are doing as they're told. I don't want people to look at how I've been describing these things and get the idea that I'm defending fascism, but I do want people to get a better understanding of how fascism grows and how it's defended by a large amount of its inhabitants, how you might well end up supporting them too. It's not enough for us to just think that fascism happens when bad men get popular. They get popular not through their own achievements, but as a tactic, supported from those who will gain a lot in the future. 10 years ago, fascism was completely off the table. We were more secure, we were affluent. But times change and eventually people begin opening up to different points of view in order to return to that nostalgia. You may even want to bear yourself the trouble of watching a few fascists talking, because believe it or not, you will be surprised by what you hear from them. They're not the stereotype that you've been taught in school, they're actually very, very interesting. They're wrong, but they're very interesting. Revolutionary Thomas Sankara once said, "A soldier without any political or ideological training can be a potential criminal." If you don't see fascism when it walks up to you, you could find yourself sidestepping into a world that you didn't want, but allowed to happen because of your ideals. And this is why I really dig Handmaid's Tale. It's a very well-made examination of a fascism and brutal patriarchy placed into the context of what has historically been a largely religious, conservative main base. And while some may view its outlandish dystopian presentation as comical, it's worth bearing in mind that these regimes only occur when some do indeed view it as a preferable utopia. And thus we must remember that it can happen here. This week I'd like to say a special thank you to Brock Barber, Chandon Grayson, Danny, David LEGITSURNAME, Dominic Trujillo, Don Friolic Olofsson, Evan Wiley, or is it Willie? Joel LINDQVIST. Love those Scandinavian names. Nigel Robinson. Patrick Toner. Shane Davis Young. Skorsk. Is that another Scandinavian name? The Cloth. And TIBERUIS GRACCHUS. Not a fan of the Greek ones, not as much. Thank you to everyone else who's been supporting me on Patreon. Just so you're aware, I'm thinking of changing the reward for the $2 patrons and above, just because I think that me doing a caption at the end of each video is not really, a good enough reward. I don't think it really works out that well. So if you've got some ideas, then please just let me know, and I can probably think about putting them in there, because I'd like to hear what you want me to do with this channel. So thanks guys, and I'll see you next time.